The young Terran was ridiculed. Then the ultimate predator declared him Sibling. The station called Veilthur Nexus hung in the darkness between 3 star systems like a jewel forgotten by the gods. It was massive. 12 rings stacked on top of each other, each one spinning at a slightly different speed, each one home to a different kind of species. The outer rings were for traders and travelers. The middle rings were for diplomats and scholars. And the innermost rings, the ones closest to the station's fusion heart, were for the powerful, the wealthy, the dangerous. Nobody went to the inner rings unless they were invited, and invitations were not given easily. Kale Morrow did not have an invitation. He did not have wealth. He did not have power. What he had was a duffel bag with a broken strap, a set of clothes that had been washed so many times the color had faded to something between gray and nothing, and a single credit chip with exactly 412 galactic standard units on it. That was not a lot of money. That was barely enough to eat for 2 weeks on a station like this. But Kale was not thinking about food right now. He was thinking about the fact that every single alien in the docking bay was staring at him. He was used to being stared at. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic stage. The Terran Confederacy had only made official contact with the wider galactic community about 40 years ago, and in that time, humans had earned a reputation that was complicated at best. Some species found them fascinating. Some found them disgusting. Most found them confusing. Humans were small compared to many galactic species. They were soft. They had no natural armor, no venom, no claws worth mentioning. Their teeth were flat and blunt. Their eyes faced forward like predators, but their bodies were built like prey. They sweated, which most species found revolting. They ate things that would poison half the known galaxy, and they had a disturbing habit of forming emotional bonds with literally anything, including machines, animals, and sometimes even furniture. Kale was 18 years old in Terran standard years. That made him an adult by human law. But barely. He was tall for a human, about 6 feet and 2 inches, but that still made him short compared to most of the beings around him. His skin was brown, darkened further by years of working under artificial sun lamps on the cargo freighter where he had grown up. His hair was black and cut short, because long hair got caught in machinery. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they moved constantly, tracking everything around him with the quiet alertness of someone who had learned very early that the universe was not a safe place. He stepped off the boarding ramp and onto the main concourse of the docking ring. The floor was made of some kind of polished stone that reflected the lights above like a dark mirror. The ceiling was high enough that even the tallest species could walk comfortably, which meant it was absurdly high for someone like Kale. The air smelled like 100 different things at once. Chemicals and cooking food and the sharp ozone tang of shield generators, and something sweet that he could not identify. The noise was enormous. Thousands of beings moving and talking and arguing and laughing in dozens of different languages, all of it layered over the constant low hum of the station's life support systems. Kale adjusted the strap of his duffel bag and started walking. He had a destination. He had a plan. The plan was simple. Get to the labor exchange on Ring 6, find work, earn enough money to buy passage to the Terran colony on Meridian the 4th, and start over. That was it. Simple. Clean. The kind of plan that sounded good in your head but usually fell apart the moment it met reality. He made it about 200 meters before reality showed up. There were 3 of them, Drelvani. They were a reptilian species, tall and lean, with scales that shifted color depending on their mood. Right now, their scales were a deep orange, which Kale knew meant amusement. They were standing in a loose semicircle near a food vendor's stall, and they had clearly spotted him the moment he stepped off the ramp. Drelvani had excellent eyesight. They also had a well-documented dislike of humans. The tallest one stepped forward. He was at least 7 feet, with a narrow snout full of small sharp teeth and eyes that were a bright, unsettling yellow. He wore the kind of clothes that said he had money, but wanted everyone to know he had money. embroidered vest over bare scales, gold chains hanging from the ridges above his eyes, boots that probably cost more than everything Kale owned combined. "Look at this," the Drelvani said, his voice carrying the hissing undertone common to his species. His translator implant converted his words to galactic standard with a slight delay. "A little Terran. All alone. How sad." His two companions laughed. It was a clicking sound, like stones being rattled together. Kale did not stop walking. He did not speed up either. He kept his pace steady and his eyes forward. He had dealt with this before. On every station, on every port, on every ship where he had worked since he was 14 years old, there had been someone who wanted to remind him that humans were small and soft and new and did not belong out here among the real species of the galaxy. The Drelvani stepped into his path. Kale stopped. He looked up at the alien. He did not say anything. "I am talking to you, little mammal," the Drelvani said. His scales had shifted to a deeper orange, almost red. "Did your mother not teach you manners?" "Oh, wait. Terrans barely have mothers. You breed like vermin in those little metal boxes you call ships." Kale felt something hot move through his chest. It was anger. But he had learned a long time ago that anger was a fire that needed to be controlled, not released. He took a slow breath. He could smell the Drelvani now. They smelled like dry sand and something metallic, like old blood. "I am just passing through," Kale said. His voice was calm. "Flat. I do not want trouble." "Trouble," the Drelvani repeated, as if the word was funny. He looked at his companions. The little Terran does not want trouble. How polite. How civilized. He turned back to Kale. "But you see, little mammal, trouble is what happens when vermin crawl into places they do not belong. This station is not for your kind. This station is for real species. Species with history. Species with culture. Not for hairless apes who only learned to leave their own planet 2 generations ago." There was a small crowd gathering now. Other species watching with varying degrees of interest. A pair of Korvathi, massive beings with 4 arms and skin like gray stone, stood near the wall and observed with their small dark eyes. A group of silvery, delicate bird-like creatures with iridescent feathers whispered to each other from a safe distance. An old make trader, his mechanical body clicking and whirring softly, paused his hover cart to watch. Nobody intervened. Nobody ever did. Kale looked at the Drelvani for a long moment. Then he looked past him, at the concourse stretching away into the distance. He calculated his options. He could try to go around. The Drelvani would probably block him again. He could fight. He would lose 3 against 1, and they were bigger, faster, and armed with natural weapons. He could call for station security. That would take time, and security on outer rings was slow and did not care much about humans. "I would like to pass," KL said simply. The Drelvani leaned down, bringing his face close to Kale's. His breath was hot and smelled like copper. "You would like to pass," he mocked. "Then make me move, little Terran. Show me the famous Terran spirit I keep hearing about. Show me why your pathetic species thinks it deserves a seat at the galactic table." Something changed in Kale's eyes. It was subtle. A hardening. A stillness that replaced the nervous alertness that had been there before. It was the look of someone who had made a decision. Not a decision to fight. Not a decision to run. A decision to simply endure. "No," Kale said. The Drelvani blinked. "No? I will not fight you. I will not entertain you. I will not give you a reason to hurt me, and then tell security that I started it. I know how this works. I have seen it before." Kale's voice was still calm, but there was something underneath it now, something solid and unmovable. "You can hit me if you want. You can take my bag. You can call me whatever you want. But I am going to keep walking, and eventually you are going to get bored." There was a moment of silence. The Drelvani stared at him. His scales flickered between orange and red, confusion and irritation mixing on his face. This was not the reaction he had expected. He had expected fear or aggression, the two responses he knew how to handle. This calm refusal was something else entirely. Then he backhanded Kale across the face. It was not a full-strength blow. If it had been, it would have broken Kale's jaw. Drelvani were strong, much stronger than humans, but it was hard enough to snap Kale's head to the side and send him stumbling back 2 steps. Hard enough to split his lip and send a thin line of blood running down his chin. Hard enough to make the crowd murmur and shift uncomfortably. Kale straightened up. He wiped the blood from his chin with the back of his hand. He looked at the red smear on his skin for a moment, then looked back at the Drelvani. And he kept walking. He walked right past the Drelvani, who was so surprised that he did not move to block him. He walked past the other 2, who looked at each other in confusion. He walked through the crowd, which parted for him silently, and he kept walking until the Drelvani and their laughter were far behind him. His lip was swelling. His cheek was throbbing. His hands were shaking, but he shoved them into his pockets so nobody could see. He was angry. He was humiliated. He was tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. But he was still moving. He was still walking forward. That was the thing about humans that most species did not understand. It was not that humans were strong. They were not. It was not that humans were fast or tough or deadly. Compared to most galactic species, they were fragile. But humans had something else. Something that did not translate well into any alien language. Humans could endure. They could take a hit and keep moving. They could lose everything and start again. They could be knocked down 100 times and stand up 101. It was not courage exactly. It was something more stubborn than courage. It was the simple, relentless refusal to stay down. Kale found the labor exchange on Ring 6. It was a large open room filled with holographic job boards and automated kiosks. The air was thick with the smell of cheap cleaning solution and the low buzz of desperate beings looking for work. Most of the beings here were from the lower end of the galactic social hierarchy. Species that were looked down on. Species that were new. Species that had fallen on hard times. Kale fit right in. He walked up to a kiosk and pressed his palm against the identification scanner. The machine hummed, read his biometrics, and pulled up his file. Species, human, Terran. Age, 18 standard years. Skills, cargo handling, basic mechanical repair, atmospheric system maintenance. Experience, 4 years on various cargo freighters. Criminal record, none. Medical conditions, none. The kiosk displayed all of this on a small screen, then asked him what kind of work he was looking for. Kyle selected everything. Cargo loading, cleaning, maintenance, food preparation. He did not care what the work was. He cared about the pay. The kiosk processed his request and displayed a list of available positions. Most of them paid badly. Some of them paid dangerously badly. The kind of wages that meant the employer knew they were exploiting workers and did not care. Kale scrolled through the list, looking for anything that would get him to Meridian IV faster. One listing caught his eye. It was different from the others. It was not a job posting exactly. It was a notice from something called the Proving Ground. The language was formal and stiff, the kind of language used by old institutions that took themselves very seriously. It read, "The Valorium Academy Proving Ground seeks candidates of all species for assessment and potential enrollment. Candidates must demonstrate exceptional physical ability, mental resilience, and combat potential. Successful candidates will receive full scholarship, housing, and a stipend for the duration of their training. No prior military experience required." Kale read it twice. Full scholarship, housing, a stipend. That was more than he had ever been offered for anything in his life. He looked at the requirements again. Exceptional physical ability, mental resilience, combat potential. He almost laughed. He was a skinny human kid with a split lip and a duffel bag full of worn-out clothes. He was about as far from exceptional as it was possible to be. But then he looked at the stipend amount. It was more than enough to live on. More than enough to save. More than enough to eventually buy passage to Meridian IV if the academy did not work out, and the assessment was free. He had nothing to lose except time, and time was the only thing he had plenty of. He pressed his palm against the screen and registered. The proving ground was on Ring 4. That was 2 rings closer to the station's core, which meant it was in a nicer part of the station. Kale took a transit pod and watched through the window as the scenery changed. The outer rings were crowded and dirty, full of market stalls and cheap housing blocks, and the kind of bars where fights broke out every night. Ring 5 was better, more organized. Ring 4 was something else entirely. The corridors here were wide and well lit. The floors were made of something that looked like white marble but was probably some synthetic material that cost more than marble. The walls were decorated with holographic displays showing images of famous warriors and scholars from a dozen different species. The air was clean and cool and smelled like nothing at all, which was the smell of serious money. Kale felt out of place immediately. He was still wearing his faded clothes, still carrying his broken duffel bag, still had dried blood on his chin. He looked like exactly what he was, a poor human kid from the wrong side of the galaxy. But he kept walking. He had registered, and he was going to show up. The proving ground was a massive arena complex at the center of Ring 4. It had its own gravity generators, its own atmosphere controls, and its own security force. The entrance was a pair of doors that were 3 stories tall, made of something dark and heavy that hummed faintly when Kale walked past them. Inside, the air changed. It was denser, slightly warmer, and it carried a faint scent that Kale could not identify, but that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. There were other candidates already gathered in the main hall, dozens of them, maybe 100. They came from every species Kale had ever heard of, and some he had not. Massive Corvati warriors with their 4 arms crossed over their stone-like chests. Drelvani soldiers in gleaming armor. Tall, graceful Sylvari with razor-sharp feathers that could cut through metal. Hulking Brexen, creatures that looked like bears crossed with tanks, covered in thick fur and natural bone armor. Quick darting Tessari, small lizard-like beings with 6 legs and the fastest reflexes in the known galaxy. And 1 human. Kale felt the stares immediately. The whispers started before he had taken 10 steps into the hall. He heard fragments of conversation in a dozen languages, all of them saying variations of the same thing. A human? Here? Is this a joke? They will be sending pets next. How did it even register? Does it know what this place is? Kale ignored all of it. He found a spot near the wall, set down his duffel bag, and waited. A Corvathi warrior who was standing nearby looked down at him. The Corvathi was enormous, at least 8 feet tall and almost as wide, with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite with a dull knife. He studied Kale the way someone might study an insect that had landed on their food. "You are in the wrong place, small one," the Corvathi said. His voice was deep enough to vibrate in Kale's chest. "This is the proving ground. Not a daycare." A few nearby candidates laughed. The Corvathi did not. He was not joking. He was genuinely confused about why a human was here. Kale looked up at him. "I registered. I am here for the assessment." The Corvathi's stone-gray face showed something that might have been pity. "You will be hurt, small one, badly. The proving ground does not care about species or size. It tests everyone the same way. You will be broken." "Maybe," Kale said, "but I am here." The Corvathi looked at him for a long moment, then shrugged his massive shoulders and turned away. He had said his piece. What the human did with it was the human's problem. Time passed. More candidates arrived. The hall grew louder, and then suddenly it grew very, very quiet. The doors at the far end of the hall opened, and something walked in that made every being in the room go still. Even the Brexen, who were afraid of almost nothing, took a step back. Even the Corvathi straightened up and lowered their arms to their sides. Kyle had heard of Vethrak but had never seen one. Most people had never seen one. They were rare, reclusive, and by almost universal agreement, the most dangerous predatory species in the known galaxy. They were apex predators in the truest sense, the top of every food chain on their homeworld, which was a planet so hostile that most species could not survive on its surface for more than a few hours. This Vethrak was female, though Kale only knew that because of the subtle differences in facial structure he had read about. She was tall, about 7.5 feet, and built like something designed by evolution to be a perfect killing machine. Her body was lean and muscular, covered in skin that was somewhere between scales and hide, dark gray with faint patterns of black that shifted when she moved. Her arms were long, ending in hands with 4 fingers, each tipped with a curved claw that looked like it could punch through ship hull plating. Her legs were digitigrade, bending backward at the knee like a predatory animal's, built for explosive speed and power. Her face was angular and sharp, with a wide mouth full of teeth that were not meant for chewing. They were meant for tearing. Her eyes were the most striking thing about her. They were large, forward-facing, and a deep, luminous amber like liquid gold. They were the eyes of something that had spent millions of years at the top of the food chain and knew it in every cell of its body. She wore minimal clothing, a harness across her chest that held several objects Kale could not identify, short, tight-fitting leggings that allowed full range of motion, no shoes. Her clawed feet gripped the floor with each step, leaving faint scratches in the synthetic marble. Around her neck was a collar of some dark metal engraved with symbols that KL did not recognize. She walked into the hall with the easy, rolling gait of a being that had never in its life needed to hurry. Every movement was efficient, precise, and utterly controlled. She did not look at the candidates. She did not need to. She already knew everything she needed to know about every being in this room just from the way they smelled and the sounds they made. Behind her walked 2 more Vethrak, males, slightly smaller but no less dangerous looking. They wore similar harnesses and moved with the same predatory grace. They were an escort, or perhaps guards, though it was hard to imagine what a Vethrak would need guarding from. The female Vethrak stopped in the center of the hall. She stood there for a moment, perfectly still, and let the silence stretch until it was almost painful. Then she spoke. "I am Rethka Vorsalin, commander of the 4th Fang, senior instructor of the Valorium Academy." Her voice was low and resonant, with a slight rumble underneath it that Kale felt in his bones. "You are here because you believe you are worthy. Most of you are wrong. The proving ground will show you the truth about yourselves. Some of you will pass. Most of you will fail. A few of you will be carried out on stretchers. This is not a threat. It is a statement of fact." Her golden eyes swept across the room. They moved slowly, methodically, cataloging every being present. When they passed over Kale, they paused. It was a tiny pause, barely noticeable. But Kyle noticed it, and he felt something strange when those amber eyes locked onto his. Not fear exactly, something deeper, something older, the feeling of being seen by something that understood exactly what he was. Then her eyes moved on, and the moment was gone. "The assessment begins in 1 hour, Rethka said. Prepare yourselves." She turned and walked out of the hall, her 2 escorts falling into step behind her. The doors closed, and the room erupted into noise. Candidates talking, boasting, comparing themselves to each other, forming alliances, sizing up competition. Kale sat on the floor with his back against the wall, his duffel bag beside him. He pressed his fingers against his swollen lip and winced. He thought about the Drelvani who had hit him. He thought about the Korvathi who had called him small. He thought about every being on every station who had ever looked at him and seen nothing worth respecting. Then he thought about those amber eyes, the way they had paused on him, the way they had seen him not as a human, not as something small and soft and worthless, but as something else. Something that the most dangerous predator in the galaxy had found interesting enough to notice. He did not know what that meant. Not yet. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was not leaving. Whatever the proving ground threw at him, whatever pain waited on the other side of that hour, he was going to face it. He was going to endure it. and he was going to keep walking forward, the same way he always had. Because that was what humans did. The hour passed faster than Kale expected. He spent most of it sitting against the wall, stretching his muscles and doing the breathing exercises that his old crew chief on the cargo freighter had taught him years ago. The crew chief, a grizzled woman named Petra, who had spent 30 years hauling cargo across the outer systems, had told him that breathing was the most important thing a human could learn to control. Control your breathing and you control your fear, she had said. Control your fear and you can think. And if you can think when everyone else is panicking, you have already won half the fight. Kale was not sure he believed her about the winning part, but the breathing helped calm the rapid drumming of his heart. Around him, the other candidates prepared in their own ways. The Korvathi stood in small groups, stretching their forearms and cracking their knuckles with sounds like breaking stone. The Drelvani practiced quick, slashing movements with their clawed hands, their scales flickering through aggressive shades of red and orange. The Brexans simply stood still, their massive bodies already weapons in their own right, their small dark eyes watching everything with patient, predatory intelligence. The Silvari preened their razor feathers, aligning each one with careful precision, turning their beautiful plumage into a coat of blades. The Tesserae skittered across the walls and ceiling, their 6 legs moving in perfect coordination, practicing the blinding speed that made them some of the most dangerous small-unit fighters in the galaxy. Nobody talked to Kale. Nobody even looked at him, except occasionally when someone would glance his way with an expression that said they had already forgotten he was there. A tone sounded through the hall, deep, resonant. It vibrated in the floor and the walls and in the bones of every being present. The far doors opened again, and this time it was not Rethka who walked in, but a team of Valorium Academy officials. They were a mixed group, various species wearing the dark blue uniforms of the Academy. They carried data pads and scanners and the cool, detached expressions of beings who had watched thousands of candidates come and go and had stopped being impressed a long time ago. The lead official was a mech, one of the machine species. His body was humanoid in shape, but made entirely of dark metal and glowing circuitry. His face was a smooth plate with 2 bright blue optical sensors for eyes and a speaker grill where a mouth would be. When he spoke, his voice was perfectly clear and completely devoid of emotion. Candidates will form a single line. You will be given a number. This number is your identity for the duration of the assessment. Your species, your name, your background, none of these matter here. Only your number. Only your performance. They formed a line. Kale ended up near the middle, sandwiched between a Brexan who smelled like pine sap and wet fur, and a Drelvani who refused to stand within arm's reach of him and kept his scales a steady, irritated orange. One by one, they filed past the officials, received a small adhesive patch with a number on it, and were directed through a set of doors into the arena complex beyond. Kale received number 47. He pressed the patch onto his chest and walked through the doors. The arena was enormous. It was an open space easily the size of several cargo hangars combined, with a ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. The floor was divided into sections, each one clearly designed for a different kind of test. Kale could see obstacle courses, open sparring rings, something that looked like a maze with walls that moved, and a section at the far end that was completely dark, its purpose hidden. Rethka Vorselin was standing on an elevated platform at the center of the arena, overlooking everything. Her 2 Vethrak escorts flanked her, and behind them stood several more Academy instructors. Rethka's amber eyes swept across the candidates as they filed in, and once again Kale felt that strange sensation when her gaze passed over him, a flicker of something. Recognition, maybe. Or curiosity. The mech official spoke again, his voice amplified by the arena's sound system. The assessment consists of 4 trials. Trial 1, Physical Endurance. Trial 2, Combat Aptitude. Trial 3, Tactical Reasoning. Trial 4, The Crucible. Each trial is eliminatory. Fail a trial, and you are removed from the assessment. There are no second chances. There are no appeals. Begin with Trial 1. The candidates were divided into groups and directed to different sections of the arena. Kale's group was sent to the obstacle course. It was a brutal thing, a series of walls to climb, gaps to jump, crawl spaces to navigate, and balance beams to cross, all of it designed to test every physical capability a body could have. The catch was that the course was designed for the galactic average, which meant it was scaled for beings much larger and stronger than a human. The walls were 12 feet high, smooth and without handholds. The gaps between platforms were 15 feet wide. The crawl spaces were tight even for human-sized beings, which meant they were impossible for the larger species. But they also had sections that required raw upper body strength to navigate. Pulling yourself along overhead bars with nothing beneath you but a 20-foot drop to padding that did not look particularly soft. Kyle watched the first few candidates attempt the course. A Korvathi went first. He was powerful, hauling himself over walls with raw strength, his forearms giving him a tremendous advantage. But he was slow. His massive body struggled in the tight spaces, and his weight made the balance beams groan dangerously. He finished, but his time was not impressive. A Drelvani went next. Faster, more agile, his long limbs eating up the distance between obstacles. He moved with reptilian efficiency, wasting no energy on unnecessary motion. His time was good, very good. He landed at the end of the course with a satisfied click of his teeth and a flash of proud green scales. A tesserae followed. The small six-legged lizard was blindingly fast, scurrying over obstacles that other candidates had struggled with. But the tesserae lacked the raw strength for some of the upper body sections, and had to find creative ways around them, costing precious time. Then it was Kale's turn. He stood at the starting line and looked at the course. 12 feet high walls, no handholds. He was tall for a human, but he was not tall enough to reach the top of a 12-foot wall without some kind of boost. The Korvathi had simply reached up and pulled themselves over. The Drelvani had used their clawed feet to dig into the wall surface and climb. Kale had neither the reach nor the claws, but Kale had something else. He had grown up on cargo freighters. Ships where the corridors were narrow and the ceilings were low, and every surface was metal, and every handhold had to be found, not given. He had spent years climbing through maintenance shafts and scaling cargo containers and swinging from overhead pipes. He had learned to move in ways that used every part of his body, not just his arms, not just his legs, but his whole body working together as a single system. He ran at the first wall. He did not slow down. He planted his foot against the wall surface about 3 feet up and pushed off, using the momentum to launch himself upward. His hands caught the top edge. He pulled himself up and over in one smooth motion, his body swinging like a pendulum, and dropped down the other side, already running. The crowd murmured. It was not an impressive move by galactic standards. Any Drelvani could have done it faster, but the fact that a human had done it at all surprised them. Kale hit the gap between platforms. 15 feet. Too far for a standing jump. Barely possible for a running jump, even for a human. He did not hesitate. He sprinted to the edge, planted his foot, and launched himself across. For a moment, he was suspended in the air, arms reaching, body stretched out. He landed on the far platform with his chest hitting the edge, his hands grabbing, his legs dangling. He hauled himself up with a grunt and kept moving. The crawl spaces were where he gained ground. While the larger species had struggled and squeezed and gotten stuck, Kale moved through them quickly. His human body was exactly the right size, flexible enough to twist through tight corners, strong enough to pull himself along overhead bars. He moved with the efficient, practiced ease of someone who had spent years navigating the cramped interior of starships. The balance beams were the hardest. They were narrow, barely 4 inches wide, and they moved. Slight oscillations, just enough to throw off your center of gravity. Kale had good balance, but he was not a silvery who could balance on a wire in a windstorm. He moved slowly here. carefully, one foot in front of the other. His arms out for balance, almost fell once, but he made it across. He finished the course and dropped to the ground at the end, breathing hard, his muscles burning. He looked up at the scoreboard. His time was not the best. It was not even close to the best. But it was not the worst either. He was somewhere in the middle of the pack, which for a human on a course designed for beings with 4 arms or 6 legs or natural climbing claws was not bad at all. The Drelvani who had gone before him looked at his time, then looked at Kale, and his scales flickered with something that was not quite contempt and not quite respect, but somewhere uncomfortable in between. Trial 1 continued. Candidates ran the course, and one by one the slowest and most struggling were eliminated. A tone would sound, a number would be called, and that candidate would be directed to the exit. No explanation, no consolation. Just gone. Kale's number was not called. He had survived the first trial. The second trial was combat. The sparring rings were simple circles marked on the arena floor, about 20 feet across. The rules were explained by the meek official in his flat, emotionless voice. No weapons, no killing, no permanent maiming. The fight continues until one candidate yields, is rendered unable to continue, or is pushed out of the ring. Matches are assigned randomly. Kale looked at the other remaining candidates. There were maybe 60 left. Corvati, Drelvani, Brexon, Tessari, Silveri, and a handful of other species he could not name. All of them bigger than him. All of them more naturally equipped for fighting than him. His first match was against a Silvari. The Silvari were deceptive. They looked delicate, almost fragile, with their slender builds and beautiful iridescent feathers. But those feathers were sharp enough to slice through cloth and skin, and the Silvari fighting style was built around speed and cutting strikes. They would dart in, slash with their wing arms, and dart out before their opponent could react. Fighting a Silvari was like fighting a beautiful, deadly whirlwind. Kale stepped into the ring. The Silvari across from him was a male, slightly shorter than Kale but much lighter, with feathers that shimmered blue and green in the arena lights. He looked at Kale with round, dark eyes that held no malice but also no mercy. The signal sounded. The Silvari moved first. He was fast, incredibly fast, darting forward with his wing arms spread wide, feathers angled for a cutting strike. Kale did the only thing he could do. He dropped. He hit the ground and rolled sideways, the Silvari's wing passing through the space where his head had been a moment before. He felt the displaced air, felt the whisper of razor-sharp feathers passing inches from his skin. He came up on one knee and threw himself backward as the Silvari reversed and came at him again. This was not a fight Kale could win by being stronger or faster. The Silvari was faster than him, and those feather blades were deadlier than anything Kale's fists could deliver. But the Silvari was also lighter, much lighter. And Kale had something the Silvari did not: mass, momentum, and the willingness to take a hit. The Silvari came in for a third pass. This time, Kale did not dodge. He turned sideways, presenting the smallest target he could, and as the Silvari's wing arms slashed toward him, he stepped into the strike instead of away from it. The feathers cut across his left forearm, slicing through his sleeve and drawing a line of bright red blood. It hurt a lot. But the pain was secondary, because Kale's right hand had already grabbed the Silvari's wing arm. The Silvari's eyes went wide. No one grabbed a Silvari's wing. That was not how you fought a Silvari. It was like grabbing a sword blade. It was stupid and painful, and it did not work. Except it did, because Kale did not just grab. He pulled. He used his heavier body as an anchor and yanked the Silvari toward him. Off balance, and then he pivoted and threw. It was not a martial arts move. It was a cargo handler's move. The same motion he had used 1,000 times to redirect heavy crates on loading docks. Weight and leverage and timing. The Silvari left the ground. He sailed through the air in a flutter of iridescent feathers and landed outside the ring. There was a moment of absolute silence. Then the arena erupted in noise. Not cheering. Not exactly. More like the sound of 100 beings all saying what at the same time. Kale stood in the ring, bleeding from his forearm, breathing hard, and looked at the Silvery, who was picking himself up off the ground with an expression of pure disbelief. Then Kale looked up at the platform where Rethka stood. She was watching him. Her amber eyes were locked onto him, and this time, there was no mistaking the expression on her predatory face. It was interest. Deep, focused, predatory interest. The kind of interest a hunter shows when they spot something unexpected in familiar territory. Kale's arm was treated by a medical drone that sprayed his cut with something that stung fiercely and then sealed the wound with synthetic skin. It would scar, but it would not slow him down. His second fight was against a Drelvani, not one of the three who had harassed him on the concourse, but a soldier, lean and professional and clearly trained. This fight went differently. The Drelvani was a disciplined fighter who used his longer reach and natural claws to keep Kale at distance, scoring hits whenever Kale tried to close in. Kale took strikes to his ribs, his shoulders, his legs. Each one hurt. Each one added to the growing map of bruises and cuts that covered his body. But Kale did not yield. He kept coming forward. Every time the Drelvani knocked him back, he stepped forward again. Every time a claw strike drew blood, he wiped it away and moved in. The Drelvani began to show frustration. His scales flickered from confident green to irritated orange. He hit harder. Kale took the hits and kept coming. The fight lasted longer than anyone expected. The Drelvani was clearly the better fighter. He had training, natural weapons, and physical advantages in every category. But Kale would not stay down. He would not yield. He absorbed punishment that should have ended the fight 3 times over, and each time he stood back up and moved forward. The Drelvani finally caught Kale with a spinning strike that sent him to the ground hard. Kale lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling far above. Everything hurt. His body was telling him to stop, screaming at him to stop. But somewhere deep inside his chest, in the place where the fire lived, the stubborn, relentless human fire that burned even when everything else was dark, something said no. Not yet. He got up. The Drelvani stared at him. His scales had gone pale, almost white, which was the color of something Kale had never seen on a Drelvani before. It was not anger or amusement or contempt. It was uncertainty. The Drelvani did not know how to process what he was seeing. He had hit this human with everything short of lethal force, and the human was still standing. Kale moved forward. The Drelvani hit him again. Kale went down again, and again he got up. Blood was running from a cut above his eye now, mixing with sweat and dripping from his chin. His ribs ached with every breath. One of his fingers might have been broken, but he stood up, set his feet, and moved forward. The crowd had gone quiet. Even the Brexen were watching now, their small dark eyes fixed on the ring with an intensity they usually reserved for real threats. Something was happening that they did not understand. This small, fragile, broken human was doing something that defied their understanding of how the universe worked. He was losing. He was clearly losing. But he was not beaten, and there was a difference between those two things that most species had never had to learn. The Drelvani looked up at the officials. For the first time in the fight, his expression was not aggressive. It was uncertain, almost pleading. "How do I stop this?" his face said. "How do I beat something that will not accept defeat?" The Drelvani attacked again. This time, KL was ready. Not to win. He knew he could not win a straight fight against a trained Drelvani warrior. But he did not need to win. He needed to survive. So when the Drelvani lunged forward with a strike aimed at his head, Kale ducked under it, stepped in close where the Drelvani's long arms were less effective, and wrapped his arms around the alien's torso. It was a grapple. A desperate, ugly, inelegant grapple. Kale locked his hands behind the Drelvani's back and held on with everything he had. The Drelvani thrashed and struck at Kale's back with his claws, opening new cuts, but Kale held on. He pressed his face against the Drelvani's chest, which smelled like dry sand and copper, and he held on, and then he started to push. The Drelvani was stronger than him, much stronger. But Kael had leverage and position, and the maddening, infuriating, impossible stubbornness of a human who had decided that he was not going to let go. He pushed forward step by step, inch by inch, driving the Drelvani backward despite the alien's superior strength. The Drelvani's feet slid on the arena floor. He tried to brace, but Kael had positioned his legs inside the Drelvani's stance, using his lower center of gravity to disrupt the alien's balance. It was another cargo handler's trick, the same principle he used when pushing heavy containers across a deck: low center of gravity, wide base, relentless forward pressure. 3 steps, 4, 5. The edge of the ring was right there. The Drelvani planted his feet for one last stand. Kael felt the resistance and for a moment thought it was over, that his strength would not be enough. But then he remembered something Petra had told him once, a long time ago, on a cargo freighter in the middle of nowhere. A human body is not limited by its muscles. It is limited by its mind. Your muscles can do more than your brain thinks they can. Your brain tries to protect you by making you stop before you are really at your limit. If you can push past that barrier, even for a moment, you can do things that should be impossible. Kael pushed past the barrier. He screamed. It was not a war cry or a battle shout. It was the raw, primal sound of a human body pushing beyond its limits. Every muscle in his body contracted at once. His vision blurred. Something in his shoulder popped with a sensation that was more weird than painful, and the Drelvani moved. 1 step, 2 steps. And then the Drelvani's foot crossed the line and the match was over. Kael let go and collapsed to his knees. His arms hung at his sides like dead things. His vision was swimming. He could taste blood in his mouth. Every breath was a small act of agony. But he had won. The arena was dead silent. Then, from somewhere above, from the platform where the instructors stood, came a sound that nobody in that arena had ever heard before. It was a low, rhythmic clicking, like stones being struck together in a steady pattern. Every being in the arena who knew what that sound was felt their blood run cold, or their equivalent. It was a Vethrak acknowledgement, a sign of recognition from one predator to another. Rethka Vor Salen was standing at the edge of the platform, looking down at the broken, bleeding, kneeling human in the sparring ring. Her amber eyes were blazing with something that went beyond interest, beyond curiosity. It was recognition. She was seeing something in this small, fragile, impossible creature that she had seen in very few beings in her long life. She was seeing the heart of a predator. Not the claws, not the teeth, not the scales or the armor or the venom, the heart. The thing that drove a predator forward when everything else said to stop. The thing that made the difference between a creature that survived and a creature that conquered. The refusal to yield, the refusal to die, the refusal to accept that the universe's verdict was final. Kael did not hear the clicking. He was too busy trying not to pass out. But he felt something. A warmth. A presence. He looked up, squinting through the blood in his eyes, and saw Rethka watching him. Their eyes met across the arena. Human brown and Vethrak amber. Prey and predator. Except that in that moment, the line between those two things was not as clear as anyone had thought. Medical drones descended on Kael, spraying him with painkillers and wound sealant, wrapping his ribs and splinting his possibly broken finger. They worked quickly and efficiently while Kael sat on the arena floor and stared at nothing and tried to remember how to breathe without his ribs screaming at him. He was told that he had passed the second trial. He nodded. He did not celebrate. He was too tired and too hurt and too aware that there were still 2 more trials to go. The remaining candidates had been reduced to about 30, less than a third of those who had started. Kael was the only human among them. He was also the most injured, covered in cuts and bruises, and moving with the careful slowness of someone whose body was held together more by willpower than by physical integrity. The third trial was tactical reasoning. This, at least, did not require physical combat. The candidates were placed in a simulation room, each one isolated in their own holographic environment. The scenario was military, a defensive position under attack by a superior force. Limited resources, multiple possible strategies. The task was to hold the position for as long as possible. Kale sat in his simulation pod and studied the scenario. His body ached, but his mind was clear. This was a problem. He was good at problems. Not because he was smarter than the other candidates, but because he was used to solving problems with limited resources. That was the story of his entire life. The other candidates approached the scenario according to their species' natural instincts. The Corvathi built fortifications and relied on raw defensive strength. The Drelvani set up ambush positions and used speed and aggression. The Brexans simply stood their ground and fought everything that came at them. The Tesserae used their speed to run hit-and-fade operations. Kale did something different. He looked at the terrain and the resources and the enemy force composition, and he did not plan for victory. He planned for survival. He set traps with the limited materials available. He used the terrain to create choke points. He deliberately gave up ground in some areas to strengthen others. He used the simulation's environmental controls to flood certain corridors, to cut power to certain sections, to turn the facility itself into a weapon. It was ugly. It was inelegant. It was the kind of strategy that a species that had spent most of its history as both predator and prey would naturally develop. Not fighting to win, but fighting to not lose. His simulation lasted longer than any other candidate's. When it finally ended, when the simulated enemy force finally overwhelmed his position, Kale's scenario had run for 43 minutes. The second longest was 31. The average was around 20. The make official reviewed the results with his flat, emotionless voice. He did not comment on Kale's performance specifically, but several of the other candidates looked at the scoreboard, then looked at Kale, and something shifted in the way they saw him. Not respect exactly. More like a recalculation, a reassessment of the value of the small, bleeding, stubborn human in the faded clothes. The third trial eliminated another 10 candidates. 20 remained, and all 20 would face the final trial. The Crucible. Nobody knew what the Crucible was. The officials did not explain it. The instructors did not describe it. The only thing the candidates were told was this: go through the dark section of the arena and reach the other side. That was it. Kale stood at the entrance to the dark section with the other 19 remaining candidates. The darkness ahead was absolute, not just the absence of light, but something deeper, something that seemed to swallow sound and warmth. Looking into it was like looking into nothing. The signal sounded and they went in. The darkness closed around Kale like a living thing. His eyes were useless. He could not see his own hand in front of his face. He could hear the other candidates around him, footsteps and breathing and the rustle of movement, but the sounds were muffled and distorted, as if the darkness was eating them. Then the sounds changed. The footsteps of the other candidates faded, as if they were moving away from him in every direction at once. He was alone, in complete darkness, in complete silence, and something was in here with him. He felt it before he heard it, a presence. Something large and close, and very, very dangerous. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, his skin prickled with goose flesh. Every primitive alarm system in his human brain began screaming at once. There is a predator. It is close. Run. Kyle did not run. He stood still in the absolute darkness, and he breathed in and out, slow and steady. He controlled his fear. He controlled his heartbeat. He let the darkness press against him from every side, and he did not break. And in the darkness, something breathed with him. Not mimicking him, but matching him. Something that had been hunting in the dark since before his species had learned to walk upright. Something that knew the darkness the way humans knew the light. KL spoke into the void. His voice was barely a whisper. I know you are there. The darkness did not answer, but KL felt the presence shift. Move closer. And for the first time in his life, he understood something that humans had forgotten a long time ago. The darkness was not empty. It was full. Full of things that moved and breathed and hunted and survived. And being afraid of the dark was not weakness, it was wisdom. But moving through the dark despite the fear, that was something else entirely. Kale started walking into the darkness, toward the presence, toward the thing that every cell in his body was telling him to run from. And the darkness, after a long measuring silence, let him pass. Kale emerged from the darkness into light that felt like a physical blow. His eyes watered and he stumbled, blinking, his hands raised against the sudden brightness. The arena floor was cold beneath his feet, and the air tasted clean and sharp after the thick, heavy nothingness of the dark section. For a moment, he just stood there, breathing, feeling the simple relief of being able to see again. He was not the first one out. 5 other candidates had already emerged, and they stood in a loose group near the exit, all of them looking shaken. A Corvati was sitting on the ground with his head in his lower hands while his upper hands gripped his knees. A Drelvani was pacing in tight circles, her scales cycling rapidly through pale colors that spoke of deep unease. A Brexan stood perfectly still, but his fur was standing on end, making him look even more massive than usual. 2 Tessari huddled together, their 6 legs intertwined, finding comfort in physical contact. Over the next several minutes, more candidates emerged. Some walked out calmly, some ran, some crawled. A few did not come out at all, and after a certain amount of time, the arena lights in the dark section activated, and medical teams went in to retrieve them. They were alive but broken, curled up on the floor in positions of complete psychological surrender. The darkness, whatever it had done to them, had reached inside and found the thing they were most afraid of, and it had shown it to them until they could not take it anymore. Of the 20 candidates who had entered, 12 emerged. Kael was one of them. He sat on the arena floor with his back against a wall and his knees drawn up to his chest. His body was a landscape of pain. The cuts on his arm from the Silvery's feathers throbbed beneath their synthetic skin patches. His ribs ached with every breath. His swollen lip had reopened at some point and was bleeding slowly again. His finger, now splinted and wrapped, sent sharp jolts of pain up his hand whenever he moved it wrong. And underneath all of that, there was a deeper exhaustion, a weariness that went past muscle and bone into something more fundamental. But he was still here. He was still conscious. He was still breathing. The make official appeared once more, his blue optical sensors sweeping across the 12 remaining candidates. He spoke without ceremony or warmth. The assessment was complete. The 12 remaining candidates had passed. They would be enrolled in the Valorium Academy, effective immediately. Housing assignments and orientation schedules would be provided. They were to report to the Academy dormitories on Ring 3 by 2200 hours station time. That was it. No congratulations. No fanfare, just a flat statement of fact and a dismissal. Kael stood up slowly, every joint and muscle protesting. He picked up his duffel bag from where he had left it before the trials. It felt heavier than before, though he knew that was just his exhaustion talking. He slung it over his good shoulder and started walking toward the exit. He made it about 10 steps before a voice stopped him. 47. She was standing at the entrance to a side corridor, her 2 Vethrak escorts behind her. Her amber eyes were fixed on Kael with that same intense, measuring look she had been giving him throughout the assessment. Up close, she was even more intimidating than she had been from a distance. The dark gray of her skin, the subtle shifting patterns, the claws, the teeth, the raw physical power contained in that lean, predatory frame. Everything about her said danger. Everything about her said apex. Kael stopped and faced her. He had to tilt his head back to look at her face, and even that small movement made his neck ache. "My name is Kael," he said. "Kael Morrow." Rethka studied him for a long moment. Then she did something that her escorts clearly did not expect. She lowered herself. not kneeling exactly, but dropping into a crouch that brought her face closer to Kale's level. It was a Vethrock gesture, one that Kale did not know the meaning of, but that made the two male Vethrock behind her exchange a sharp, surprised look. Kale Morrow, Rethka repeated. Her voice was different now, softer. Not gentle, because Kale did not think anything about a Vethrak could truly be called gentle, but less formal, more personal. You are injured. I am fine. You are lying. Your species does this often. You minimize your damage. It is a survival trait, I think. Showing weakness invites predation. But you do not need to perform for me. She reached out with one clawed hand and, with a delicacy that seemed impossible for something that could punch through steel, touched the edge of the cut above his eye. Kale flinched, more from surprise than pain. Her claw was warm. This will scar. I have scars. I know. I can see them. Her amber eyes moved across his face, his neck, his hands, reading the history written on his body the way a scholar reads text. Work scars, burn marks on your hands from engine components, a healed fracture on your left wrist, calluses from cargo work. You have lived a hard life for one so young. KL said nothing. There was nothing to say. It was true. Rethka straightened up, rising back to her full height. She looked down at him, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with volume. Do you know what the crucible was? A test. In the dark. Yes. But do you know what was in the dark with you? Kale thought about it. The presence, the breathing, the feeling of something large and close and supremely dangerous. A Vethrock, he said. Rethka's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. On a Vethrak face with those teeth, it was a deeply unsettling expression. Me, she said simply. I was in the dark with every candidate. I moved between you. I watched you. I tested you. The implications settled into Kale's mind slowly. She had been in there, moving through the absolute darkness, invisible, silent, the ultimate predator in her natural element. She had been close enough to touch him, close enough to kill him without him ever knowing she was there. And he had known not what she was, but that she was there. He had felt her, and he had spoken to her. Most candidates freeze, Rethka continued. The darkness and the knowledge that something is hunting them overrides their rational mind. They panic, they run, they curl up and wait for it to end. The ones who make it through do so by suppressing their fear, by forcing themselves to move despite the terror. That is strength of a kind. But you did something different. She paused, and KL saw something in her amber eyes that he had not seen before. Not just interest, not just curiosity. Something deeper, something that resonated. You acknowledged my presence. You spoke to me. You did not run from the predator. You walked toward it. In all my years as an instructor, in all the thousands of candidates I have watched go through the crucible, I have never seen anyone do that. Not Korvathi. Not Brexin. Not even other Vethrock. Kyle swallowed. His throat was dry. I was scared. Of course you were scared. Fear is not the absence of courage. Fear is the environment in which courage exists. Without fear, there is nothing to be brave against. You were terrified. I could smell it on you. The chemical signature of human fear. Your heart rate was elevated. Your body was producing stress hormones at a level that should have made you non-functional. And you walked toward me anyway. She crouched again, bringing her face close to his. Her eyes were molten gold, ancient and vast and full of something that Kale did not have a word for. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Your species is young. You have been among the stars for less than the blink of an eye. You are small and soft and fragile, in ways that make most species dismiss you without a second thought. But I have watched you today. Kale Morrow. I watched you take a blow from a Drovani on the concourse and keep walking. Yes, I saw that. I was already observing the station's feeds before the assessment began. I watched you climb walls that were not built for your body. I watched you fight beings twice your size and refuse to yield even when your body was breaking. I watched you outthink warriors with decades of training. And I watched you walk toward the deadliest predator in the galaxy in complete darkness, on nothing more than the irrational, magnificent belief that you could. She held his gaze for a long, breathless moment. There is a word in the Vethrak language, she said, Selkari. It does not translate well into galactic standard. The closest equivalent would be something like kin of the hunt, or one who shares the predator's heart. It is a word we use for beings who are not Vethrak by blood, but who carry within them the same fire that drives us, the same refusal to bow, the same willingness to face the darkness. It is the highest honor one Vethrak can bestow upon another species. She stood up and looked at him with an expression that Kale would remember for the rest of his life. Rest, Kale Morrow. Heal. Report to the dormitories. Your real training begins tomorrow. She turned and walked away, her escorts falling into step behind her. Kale watched her go, standing alone in the corridor with his broken duffel bag and his battered body, and he felt something shift inside him, not just hope, something bigger than hope, the feeling that, for the first time in his life, someone had looked at him and seen not what he was, but what he could be. The dormitories on Ring 3 were nicer than any place Kale had ever lived. Each candidate had their own room, small by galactic standards but palatial compared to the crew bunks on cargo freighters. The room had a real bed with an actual mattress. It had a private washing unit with hot water. It had a desk, a storage closet, and a window that looked out onto the station's interior. A view of curving metal and distant lights that was strangely beautiful. Kale set his duffel bag on the bed and stood in the middle of the room for a long time, just looking at it. Then he went to the washing unit, peeled off his ruined clothes, and stood under the hot water until it ran pink with diluted blood and then clear. He treated his wounds with the medical kit he found in the storage closet. He changed into the Academy-issued clothes that had been left on the bed, simple dark blue shirt and pants that were clean and new and fit properly. He lay down on the mattress, which was soft in a way that he was not used to, and he stared at the ceiling. He was in. He had made it. The cargo handler's kid from the outer systems had passed the Valorium Academy's proving ground. Sleep came fast and hard, pulling him down into a darkness that was warm and safe and held no predators at all. The morning came with a tone from the room's communication system and a holographic display that showed his schedule for the day. Orientation, introductions, initial evaluations. The schedule was dense. Every hour accounted for from 0600 to 2200. Kale dressed, ate the meal bar he found in his room's supply kit, and stepped out into the corridor. The dormitory level was a long, curving hallway with doors on both sides, each one marked with a candidate's number. Kale's door had a small plaque that read 47, but someone had already replaced the number plates with nameplates. His read K. Morrow, Terran. Other candidates were emerging from their rooms. Kale recognized most of them from the assessment. The Korvathi warrior who had told him he was in the wrong place, now wearing Academy blues that strained across his massive frame. Two of the Drelvani, their scales a neutral, wary gray. 3 Brexen, looking like armored mountains in 2 small clothes. A pair of Tessari, skittering along the wall in their quick, darting way. A Silvery whose feathers had been trimmed to regulation length, which seemed to cause him physical discomfort. And others, species Kale had not interacted with during the assessment, but who had clearly survived their own trials. Nobody spoke to him. They glanced at him, acknowledged his presence with the minimum courtesy required, and then focused on their own preparations. Kale was used to this. He fell into step with the group as they made their way to the orientation hall. The orientation was conducted by a series of academy instructors. They explained the rules, the expectations, the training schedule, and the consequences of failure. The academy was not a gentle institution. It produced warriors, tacticians, intelligence operatives, and leaders. It had been doing so for over 300 years, drawing talent from across the galaxy and forging it into something harder and sharper. The dropout rate was 70%. Many of those dropouts left with injuries that took months to heal. A few left in medical stasis. KL listened